Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Top 25 with A to Z CFB. I'll be your host, Zachary Siegel, and we're gonna go into it after a really crazy week of college football. Multiple top five teams losing, some overtime victories, some overtime losses, depending on your team affiliation, and we even got a new face on this Heisman list. So. Before we get into the top 25 this week, I want to thank you for uh, clicking on this video, for watching, and without further ado, let's get it. So, for Heisman Watch this week, we've decided to trim it down to just the top three, right? Top three, talk about them a little bit. And number three on this list, and new on this list this week, is going to be Dante Moore. There were a few guys that I could have put on this list. Someone like Trinidad Chambliss, who kind of came out of nowhere and had a really good week. But somebody who, we're in week six, they haven't played yet this year. Probably not someone who is really Heisman contending right now. Dante Moore is leading, an undefeated Oregon team against, he played a crazy good game against a whiteout conditions Penn State last week. I think he's doing everything he needs to do right now. And if this team continues to win and they make the playoffs, who knows? Maybe he will win the Heisman. Number two and number one are the same as last week. That is going to remain Carson Beck at Miami and Haynes King from Georgia Tech. Two guys who are just playing some really good football right now. All right, getting into the top 25, my honorable mentions of the week. We have two teams that are playing each other this week in North Texas and South Florida. Ideally, possibly one of these two top teams could find their way onto a the top 25 next week. North Texas gave their students the day off because of this crazy game. And look, Drew Mestamaker is playing really good football. Byron Brown is playing really good football. Both of these teams are primed and ready, I think, to kind of be potentially that top tw that group of five um, representative. Another group of five representative that could make their state their claim is Memphis. Again, another team playing really good football. Another team that is kind of living up to the hype that maybe was set for them last year, but they could not meet. Next, you got Duke, went on the road, beat the brakes off of Syracuse. Not much more to be said there. Utah, a team that I still think is really good, beat the brakes off of West Virginia this last week. Absolutely broke my heart. But they kind of went back with if you exclude that Texas Tech game, they're a top 15 team. And then Maryland, a team that really hasn't done it against anyone impressive, but is still an undefeated team. I'll get to go see them play in person this weekend against Washington. All right, getting into the top 25. Number 25 and 24, they just played this last week. 25 is Florida State, and number 24 is Virginia. Florida State had a few opportunities to win that game, but some self-inflicted wounds kind of ended it for them. That dropped pass in the end zone by Deuce Robinson that would have tied the game. And then Virginia, on the other hand, really got lucky with some of the times that Florida State couldn't capitalize off of some of Virginia's mistakes. Not to mention, probably one of the greatest field stormings I've seen in years, if not maybe ever, right? That was an insane game, an insane ending to the game. And frankly, it was just so much fun to watch from start to finish. Both teams made mistakes. Both teams figured out what they needed to do by the end to win. Number 23, that's going to be the Illinois Illini. They're back on this list after a brief hiatus out of it. And look, they had a really solid win over USC. Luke Altmaier managed to put up four total touchdowns, including a receiving touchdown, a rushing touchdown, and two passing touchdowns. That was, like I said, a really solid win over a really good team. And frankly, whatever team won that was going to be on this list this last week. Another team that took a few week hiatus off but is now back is going to be the Arizona State Sun Devils. They were a preseason top 15 team, and I still think that they have the talent to be a top 15 team. They have two back-to-back wins over religious Texas schools, if that means anything. A Baylor a couple weeks ago, and then a TCU victory where it was a really gutsy end of the game, fourth quarter, double-digit points win. Another 27-24 victory. Besides that Mississippi State miracle, right? If it wasn't for that, Arizona would probably be much higher right now. Notre Dame finding themselves slowly climbing back up this list, up 3 spots from last week, now back to 500 on the season after a destructive game, a absolute annihilation of Arkansas to end Sam Pittman's coaching career. Um, like they beat them 56-13 against one of the more electric offenses, right? Their Arkansas's main complaint this year wasn't their offensive production, right? It wasn't their what Taylor Green and company was able to do on offense. It was always their defense giving it too much points. And Notre Dame did a really good job that week of maximizing both of those issues for the Razorbacks. Number 20, that's going to be the Texas Longhorns. They did not play a game this week. They also didn't move up or down. Look, they didn't have an opportunity to disappoint me this week, which in some ways is a positive, but they do have a tough game this upcoming week. I know that Florida has had their own woes, has had their own issues, but look, DJ Lagway was a preseason Heisman favorite for a reason. And I mean, so is Arch. I think this is two really, really talented teams who are getting really, really mismanaged right now. And maybe we're dealing with a little bit of too much hype. So maybe look, a 20 to unranked uh, matchup is something that both these teams need. I do think that it's very possible for either team to win. I know the AP still has Texas in the top 10. I think that's ludicrous. Um, Unlike the AP, I actually watched the games, but I think that Texas is still a very talented team. And if they can figure it out, do a little bit of soul searching this season, they're 3-1. This isn't a lost season by any means. Number 19, the BYU Cougars. They also had a comeback win against Colorado. They played good, consistent football, and Bear Bachmeier is 6 touchdowns to 0 interceptions right now. He's playing really, really good football, especially for a true freshman. Um, Again, a comeback victory. They proceeded to just put up at least 7 points, right? Almost, they put up 3-7-7-7, right? They consistently scored. They consistently mitigated Colorado after the first quarter. And I think this is a really, really dangerous team who gets to travel to Morgantown, West Virginia this weekend. Two fan bases that aren't the biggest fans of each other. Number 18, Tennessee, -1 actually this week after a close victory to Mississippi State. Mississippi State is a really good program. They took down Arizona State. They have been playing really good football this week or this year. But Tennessee needs to figure out ways to beat the teams they're supposed to beat and maybe finish some games, right? If they beat Georgia 2 weeks ago, we'd be talking about a completely different Tennessee team. But they looked like they were still dealing with some of the issues from that week, and I think that Tennessee, while they still absolutely could, um, make a big run at the playoffs, it's going to be on some of the guys who maybe aren't into making plays right now, and players like Chris Brazell, one of the best receivers in college football, are going to have to continue to step up and be consistent and make those plays. Michigan, they did not play this past weekend, but frankly, they don't really have much of a difficult schedule until the game, right? The three biggest opponents they have include Maryland, Washington, and USC. And if they can be a one-loss team going into that Ohio State game, we've seen over the past several years that it doesn't really matter what these teams are, right? It's going to be a good game. It's going to be a close game. I think Michigan is still a very good team, and I think that because they don't have that intense a competition heading throughout the rest of the season, it's going to be a really, really great opportunity for Bryce Underwood to grow and develop as a player. Number 16, Missouri. They had a expected walloping over UMass, and I think that they I think Missouri should be higher on this list. I'm not gonna lie. I think they are higher. I played around with this week for a while because I wanted them to be higher and I couldn't convince myself to do it. But I do think that Missouri is, like I said, one of the best teams in the SEC, and they have the best roster they've had in the last few years. And they're now not getting that benefit of the doubt because it doesn't benefit the narratives that the higher up people want to push for the SEC right now. I think as some of these bigger teams, some of these other undefeated or one or two loss teams in the SEC accrue a few more losses and Missouri continues to dominate, that Missouri will fire up these rankings and be, a tool for the college football playoff committee. Bo Pribula is playing like a Heisman candidate right now. Number 15, LSU. a team that was top five last week, and we're going to see a trend here over this next run. We're going into what I'm calling the pit of despair. This 13, 14, 15 are all top five teams, at least by my standards, that lost this last week. LSU lost to Ole Miss, a team that um, saw some issues with Austin Simmons and decided to turn to Ferris State transfer quarterback Trinidad Chambliss. Um, it's kind of funny because LSU, the moment that they got a really good defense, their offense stopped producing. And I'm not sure if this is a Nussmeier problem. I'm not sure if this is a Kelly problem. I do know that they simply have an issue. And that issue is right now, it's that they need to continue to win games if they are going to make the playoffs. They do not have an easy road. No one in the SEC has an easy road, and they are definitely not, at this point, my favorites to win the SEC anymore. Their offense needs to step up. Their offensive line was atrocious. Their run game really needs to take effect, and that's pretty much it, right? Garrett Nussmeier is doing fine things, but he can't do things if he doesn't have any time. Number 14, that's gonna be the Penn State Nittany Lions. Uh, it's time to have a pretty uncomfortable talk about James Franklin. I try to avoid these kind of things. And if you follow me on TikTok, I posted a TikTok and on Instagram, an Instagram post about this. But look, Penn State is not getting to where they need to be under James Franklin. They beat teams they're supposed to beat, that they're favored to beat, on almost a 100% clip, but they just can't handle it against a top 10 team. And look, credit to Oregon. They're a very, very good team. But Penn State at some point is going to have to prove that they can beat some of these better teams, and they just cannot do it. Number 13, the Georgia Bulldogs. They have a major problem. That problem is spelled Bama. Kirby Smart is 1-7 against the Crimson Tide and 108-20 as an overall record against every other teams. It wasn't just the Saban era, right? If it was just the Saban era, we wouldn't be still talking about this. But Kirby Smart clearly cannot beat Alabama as a program, even under the Kalen DeBoer time when they've even lost already this season, had some more embarrassing losses under the DeBoer era. Georgia still can't seem to actually get it together and beat beat Alabama. And while I do think they have a very, very good shot at being still a playoff team and still maybe even competing in the SEC championship, they still have to figure out how to beat Alabama. Speaking of Alabama, that is the number 12 school. And look, a lot of people were ready to throw them out the window, throw them under the bus, and say, look, Alabama is done for. They're over, kaput. Um, After that first loss. But look, they're busting out the fun plays, right? We saw the Caden Proctor screen pass. We're seeing Alabama and Ty Simpson finally kind of connect. Ryan Williams, if he can be the best receiver that he's projected to be, so right now Jeremy Bernard's the best receiver on this team, and stop leading the SEC in drops, this is going to be a very, very, very good Alabama team who gets to travel to our number 11 team this week, or sorry, who gets to host our number 11 team this week, and that's going to be the Vanderbilt Commodores. This last week with giving up 35 points to Utah State was not necessarily the best showing for this defense. Regardless, their offense seems to be pretty unstoppable. I know this is going to be counterintuitive with a number 12 Bama and number 11 Vanderbilt, and I'm going mostly off of resumes at this point, but I do think that Alabama is the better team than Vanderbilt. It's hard for me to ignore Vanderbilt's undefeated record, the level of football that they have been playing. And with a loss to on the Crimson Tide's docket, it does seem like, it makes sense to put Vandy 11, Alabama 12, but I do have a hard time seeing Vanderbilt walk into Tuscaloosa and take it in back-to-back years. That being said, if there is a year for them to do it, it's this year. Diego Pavia is playing out of his mind, and it should be a really, really fun matchup anyway. Number 10 is going to be the Texas A&M Aggies. Look, Auburn is a really good football team, but so is Texas A&M. I said this last week that they shouldn't take the Tigers lightly. And look, this is the first time since 2016 that they are starting 4-0. I think Mike Elko has something really special in Marcel Reed, and this team is going to be is definitely dangerous, and it finally feels like the tides of fate are crashing upon their shores. Metaphorically speaking, obviously there are no shores anywhere near Texas A&M. That being said, I think they are going to definitely make some waves later on. Number nine, this should be the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. I know they only beat Wake Forest in overtime by 1 point, but we see these, right? We see teams stumble and fall in the coming weeks after a big win, such as maybe one in Death Valley. That being said, Georgia Tech didn't, right? I think this was a more impressive hold on than a lot of other things. I think that Georgia Tech, they didn't move them up or down this week. I thought that was pretty fair. And Haynes King being my Heisman favorite right now is definitely also fun. They're a really, really good team who plays really, really good winning football. And I think they're going to continue doing that as the time goes on. Number eight, the Texas Tech Red Raiders. They moved up this week without playing a game, but they're coming off of, a really, really solid victory over Utah. And although without them actually playing this week, it's kind of weird to move them up 6 spots. There was a lot of teams obviously that moved down, and I think they're better than the ones who moved down, especially being an undefeated team. If they were a part of week 5, I have no doubt they would have been just as much as the madness as anyone else. But I do think that Texas Tech is going to play our next team in the Big 12 championship. That team being the number 7 Iowa State Cyclones, who are a 5-0 program coming off of a pretty dominant victory over Arizona, who had a good victory the week before. Um, Iowa State continues to play really, really good football, and they play their football. They always and always are, they always will be and always are under Matt Campbell, the most efficient team, not efficient, the most disciplined team on the field. They don't make mistakes. They make the smart play, and they're a really, really difficult team to beat. In fact, I think 39-14 is a rarity for them, right? Because they don't blow teams out. They beat teams the way that they want to beat teams. And that usually is by one score or less. Number 6, the Indiana Hoosiers going in playing Iowa, beating them 20-15. Look, when you play Iowa, especially when you go to Iowa, you play Iowa football. And Indiana played Iowa football better than Iowa played Iowa football that day. Kurt Cignetti is a really, really tough coach to bet against at this point. And Indiana, if they can handle their business against some of the better teams down the stretch, I think that this is going to be a very, very dangerous team, and one that could mess around and find themselves playing in the Big Ten championship. Number 5, that should be Ole Miss. Now 5-0, up 10 spots after a victory against LSU. It seems like they found their missing piece, right? They were already winning games even without solid quarterback play. And moving into Trinidad Chambliss, the Rebels were able to stump LSU and put up 24 points against one of the best defenses in the SEC. Look, I also made a TikTok about this. It is really, really, it really does not matter what your stars look like coming into college, what level of recruit you were coming into college. It matters how you play football. And this is the best example of it, right? Benching Austin Simmons for Trinidad Chambliss. I don't know if they win that game without the excellent quarterback play of Trinidad Chambliss. This is a very, very good football team, and I think a better one than last year, despite losing a lot of the guys they did, including their leader Jackson Dart. Number 4, the highest rated SEC team that I have on this list is the Oklahoma Sooners, another team that didn't play this last week, but moved up 7 spots in the rankings. They're handling the gauntlet really well. They're undefeated. They beat Auburn, they beat Michigan, right? And now while they still have a very, very, very difficult schedule ahead of them, I do think that with the Red River Showdown in just 2 weeks, right? They have one more fluff game of the year against Drew DeShields and the Kent State Golden Flashes, and then it is time to play Texas. And I think that this year is a very different year, even without John Mateer, even if they have Michael Hawkins starting at quarterback. I think this is a much better team with a more experienced quarterback and in Michael Hawkins, and I think that they take down the Texas Longhorns. That being said, that's always a tough game, and it will be a bloodbath. Number 3, I have the Ohio State Buckeyes. First time they've cracked the top 3 on my list, and I stand by that because this was their first impressive win of the season. I know they beat Texas, but again, I think that was more of an indictment of Texas not knowing what in God's name they were doing, and in more reality, Ohio State just capitalizing off of these things. Julian Sayin is the best completion percentage in the country. He's playing really mindful football right now, something that I think a lot of people were worried about him doing. Jeremiah Smith is doing what he does best, and CJ Donaldson falling into the end zone a couple times in a really, really difficult place to win is the first time that I've really thought this highly of Ohio State this season. Look, they're still Ohio State. They still won the national championship last year. And it frankly wouldn't surprise me at this point if they did it again. What would surprise me, though, if they beat the number 2 team, the Miami Hurricanes, who are just moving down a spot. They didn't have a game, but the team above them, which you could probably guess at this point, had a much more impressive win or had a win in general. Look, Miami, like I said, they didn't do anything wrong to move down. They just fell victim to a little bit of recency bias. And they are going to have a very, very angry Florida State team looking to knock them off this week for the state of Florida. This is kind of the final battle for Florida, right? You get Miami and Florida State playing against each other. You're going to have Thomas Castellanos, another Heisman contending quarterback, playing against this really, really stout Miami defense. You have Carson Beck, like I mentioned before, a really my number 2 in the Heisman rankings right now, going against that really stout Florida State defense, right? There's going to be a really, really good game despite the recent loss to Virginia. And finally, number 1 on this list, what you all have been waiting for is the Oregon Ducks. 5-0, a win at Penn State in whiteout conditions, one of the toughest places to play in the country, 30-24. Look, this is the most impressive win of the year of anybody, I think. It's a team that, look, Penn State, while they're not necessarily a proven team by any means, they are still, a preseason top 2 team. And Dante Moore is playing some of the best football that I think we have seen him play. DeCorian Moore, one of their freshman wide receiver, is probably one of the best all-around wide receivers in football. He blocks, he catches, he knows where he is on the field, and he does it all at a very elite level as a freshman already. This is the team that I'm probably the most excited for to continue watching, and dare I say, my national championship favorites. Is it about time that Oregon secures a national title? All right. That was a ton of fun. That was a lot of information that we just went over. And we have some really, really fun games coming up this week. So without further ado, go watch some football, go have fun, and I'll see you all next week.